The Mafia boss lost everything until his maid changed his life. In seconds, the world thought Luca Romano was dead, and in a way, he was. Death would have been a mercy, a clean ending to a life lived in blood and smoke. What was left of him was just residue, a stain of a man haunting the gray space between a violent past and an empty grave. In the shadows of Chicago's underworld, the rumors flew like stray bullets. They said the betrayal had broken him. They said he was paranoid, a ghost in a fortress of his own making, jumping at the creak of a floorboard. Some whispered he was suicidal, that he'd spent the last 6 months staring down the barrel of a gun. Too much of a coward to either pull the trigger or walk away. The truth, as it often is, was simpler and uglier. He was just waiting for the last frayed nerve to snap, for the part of him that still felt the phantom ache of his brother's death to finally go numb. The failed hit hadn't just been a hit. It was an amputation. The men he'd broken bread with, the men who'd sworn loyalty on their grandmother's graves, had taken everything. They took his empire, his power, and his money. But the kill shot, the one that hollowed him out, was the loss of his younger brother, Nico, who had bled out on the cobblestones while Luca's trusted capos fled. Now, he lived in that hollowing. His fortress was a crumbling, Gilded Age manor 30 miles outside Chicago, a place of cracked marble, dying ivy, and windows fogged with grime. It was a tomb, and he was its willing occupant. The estate was maintained by a skeleton staff, most of them too old or too new to understand what the Romano name had once meant. The only person Luca trusted, the only one left from the old days, was Mrs. Petrov. She had been his father's housekeeper, a woman built of granite and quiet disapproval. She was the one who ensured the pipes didn't burst, that the pantry held liquor, and that the decay remained on the outside of the walls, even as it consumed her boss from within. Mrs. Petrov knew he was drowning in the dark, but she would not, under any circumstances, let him drown in filth. The few staff members who had survived the purge of his old life had long since fled. Terrified of his rages, or worse, his suffocating silence, she needed new help. She hired quietly, avoiding agencies, favoring referrals from a local church outreach. She trusted her gut, which had kept her alive in this world for 40 years. This time, her gut led her to a girl named Sophia Marquez. That was the name on the flimsy, forged papers. Anyway, she was small, in her early 20s, with hair the color of black coffee pulled into a severe knot at the nape of her neck. She had the kind of eyes that seemed to have seen too much, the eyes of a frightened deer that knows the wolves are close. When Mrs. Petrov interviewed her, the girl barely spoke, answering questions in a whisper, her gaze fixed on her own tightly clasped hands. She looked as though a strong gust of wind might snap her in two, but she was desperate, and she was available. Mrs. Petrov hired her on the spot. Sophia was not just looking for a job, she was burrowing. She was hiding from a past that was hunting her. She was hiding from Diego, who had whispered promises of America and delivered only bruises and the suffocating terror of his jealousy. Diego, who had thought he could play with the big boys, getting involved with cartel runners, taking their money and then vanishing when the debt came due. He had vanished. But she had not. The men he'd crossed didn't care who paid the debt, only that it was paid. They knew her face. They knew she had been his. This job was a miracle, a fortress with high stone walls, set far back from any road, a place wrapped in rumors and fear. Who would ever look for a terrified, undocumented immigrant in the ruined lair of a broken mafia boss? All she had to do was keep her head down, scrub the floors, wash the linens, and remain invisible. Terror was her religion, and invisibility was her prayer. Luca had not stepped into the courtyard in months. It was where the ambush had happened, where Nico had fallen. But that morning, the walls of his study felt too close, the air too thick with the smell of stale whiskey and his own self-loathing. He was pacing, a bottle in his hand, the sun a weak, watery orange through the stained glass window. It was maybe 10 in the morning. He needed air, even if it was damp and cold. He shoved open the heavy oak doors and stopped. Someone was in his courtyard. It was the new girl, the one he'd seen fleetingly in the halls, a flash of a dark skirt and a white apron. She was on her hands and knees in the damp, cold air, scrubbing the base of a marble angel statue. The statue was stained. It was not rust, it was blood. It was Nico's blood, and the blood of 2 of his guards. It had soaked deep into the porous white marble. In the weeks after Mrs., Petrov had sent men out with bleach, with acid, with every conceivable solvent. The stain had faded, but it remained, a dark, ugly red shadow that mocked him. And this girl, this child, was scrubbing it. His voice, unused for days, came out like a rasp drawn over stone. "What the hell are you doing?" Her shoulders bunched, a single, violent reaction, as if he'd struck her, but she did not turn. She did not look at him. She just froze, her hand clenched around a stiff brush in a metal bucket. He stepped closer. He was a big man, and the alcohol and rage made him loom. "I asked you a question." She spoke to the stone angel, her voice barely a breath. "Cleaning, sir." "No one told you to clean that. Leave it." He watched her. He saw the tremble in her small back, the way her knuckles were white where she gripped the brush. He expected her to scurry away. He wanted her to. Her presence was a violation. She took a breath, and then, in a movement of quiet, shocking defiance, she dipped the brush back into her bucket. It smelled of vinegar and lemon, and began to scrub again, harder. Luca stared, the audacity of it, the sheer, silent insolence. He felt a sudden, hot urge to throw the bottle in his hand, to see her shatter. Instead, he just stood there, the whiskey suddenly not strong enough to burn away the knot in his throat. He turned, the gravel crunching under his boot, and stalked back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. His days continued their bleak, brown liquor rotation. He drank, he broke things, he refused calls, letting them go to a voicemail he never checked. Mrs. Petrov left trays of food outside his study. They rotted. He ignored the quiet, efficient staff who moved around him like mice. But he started to see her. He began, against his will, to watch her. He would sit in the dark of the library, which overlooked the service wing, and see her hanging heavy. Wet sheets on the line, the gray autumn wind whipping her thin cotton dress against her legs. He'd catch her shadow in the grand hall, polishing silver that had not been touched in a decade, her movements economical and precise. She was a contradiction that snagged on the dull edges of his mind. She moved like a ghost, so silent he'd turn and find her there, dusting a bookshelf, her eyes down. She jumped at every closing door, at the sound of Mrs. Petrov's voice calling her name. She was clearly terrified of the world, and yet she'd not flinched from him. He was the monster in the rumors, the man who had ordered deaths and buried secrets, and she had knelt in his brother's blood and ignored his command. He could not reconcile the two. This quiet curiosity was the first new feeling he'd had in months, and it irritated him more than the grief. Sophia knew to avoid the West Wing. That was his wing. The air there was heavier, colder. Mrs. Petrov had been clear. Mr. Romano was not to be disturbed. His study was to be left alone. His bedroom was off limits. One afternoon, she was in the main dining room, a cavernous, cold space, polishing a silver tureen that was tarnished black. The house was tomb quiet, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Then she heard the roar. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap, a deep, guttural explosion of rage. Sophia froze, the silver polish cloth clutched in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. The sound came from his study, down the hall. The door was usually closed. Today, it was cracked open, just an inch. Against every instinct of self-preservation, she found herself creeping closer. She was a mouse, drawn by the sleeping cat's snore. "You think I care about the assets?" Luca Romano was screaming into a phone. His voice was raw, breaking. "You think I care about the shipping lanes? You left him there. You left Nico to bleed out on the street while you ran. You coward." Sophia pressed herself against the wall, her breath held tight in her chest. She risked a glance through the crack. He was not the towering monster from the courtyard. He was a man breaking apart. He was hunched over his massive mahogany desk, the phone crushed to his ear, his other hand gripping the carved edge of the wood so hard his entire arm shook. She could see the glint of sweat on his temple, the dark, wet tracks on his unshaven cheeks. He was crying. It was not a gentle grief. It was corrosive, a hot, violent pain that seemed to be physically tearing him apart. The rage was just the smoke from the fire. She knew that fire. She had felt a different version of it, the cold fire of fear. This was the hot fire of loss. He roared something incoherent into the receiver and then smashed the phone down onto its cradle, splintering the bakelite. But it wasn't enough. With a sound that was half sob, half growl, he swept his arm across the desk. Bottles, heavy glass tumblers, stacks of papers, a bronze lamp. All of it flew through the air, shattering against the far wall with a sickening crash of glass and metal. Sophia flinched, a small gasp escaping her lips. She recoiled, her back hitting the wall. She turned and fled, her soft-soled shoes silent on the marble. She did not stop until she was in the pantry, her hands shaking so hard she could barely breathe. She had seen the cracks. She had seen the raw, bleeding wound beneath the beast's hide, and it made him, terrifyingly, human. That night, Luca couldn't settle. The phone call with what was left of his old associate had ripped the scabs off, leaving the wound exposed. He needed more alcohol. The bottles he'd broken in the study had been the last of the good scotch. He stalked through the dark house, his steps heavy, making his way to the main kitchen pantry. He expected darkness, but there was a light on. A single, bare bulb glowed over the massive steel prep table in the center of the kitchen. She was there, the maid, Sophia. She was sitting on a high wooden stool, her back to him. Her thin shoulders were shaking. A sound, a tiny, choked-back sob, cut through the silence. He was about to turn, to leave her to her misery. He had no space for anyone else's pain. His own was a greedy, consuming thing. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw the paper on the table in front of her. It was pink, a formal letter, crumpled and smoothed out. "The kitchen is closed," he growled. She gasped, a sound of pure terror, and whirled around on the stool. Her face was pale and streaked with tears. She tried to hide the letter, her hand flying to cover it, crumpling it in her fist. I'm sorry, sir. I was leaving." He was not a nice man. He had forgotten how to be. He stepped into the light and her eyes widened. He felt a cold, familiar anger rise. The world was full of victims, all of them wanting something. He stepped forward and, before she could react, snatched the letter from her hand. "No, please," she cried. A small, desperate sound. He ignored her, smoothing the cheap paper. It was an eviction notice. Final warning. The landlord was giving her 3 days to pay or be out. He felt a cold sneer twist his lips. All this quiet defiance, and in the end, she was just like the rest of them. Weak. "You're crying in my kitchen over rent?" His voice was low. Dangerous. "You think this is a charity? You think I'm running a halfway house for every stray who wanders in?" Her face changed. The terror receded, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was a look he hadn't expected. He tossed the letter back onto the table. It landed in a puddle of her tears. "Get out," he snarled. "If you want charity, go to a church. Pack your things and leave my house." He braced himself for the begging, the pleading, the offers. It was always the same. Women, men. It didn't matter. When they were desperate, they groveled. Sophia just stood there, her chest heaving, her dark eyes fixed on his. She looked down at the letter, then back up at him. The tears had stopped. Her eyes were just dark, deep, and utterly empty of any illusion. She slid off the stool. She whispered, and the sound was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. But it cut through the silence of the vast kitchen, louder than his own shouting had been. "I didn't ask for anything." She didn't say, "Sir." She didn't raise her voice. She just stated the fact, a simple, unassailable truth. She picked up a thin, worn coat from the back of the stool, walked past him, giving him a wide berth as if he were a rabid dog or a piece of poison, and disappeared out the service door into the cold night. The door clicked shut, a soft, final sound. Luca stood alone in the kitchen. The single light bulb hummed. The silence was absolute, heavier than any noise. He stared at the spot where she had been. He stared at the tear-stained eviction notice. "I didn't ask for anything." The words echoed. They found a crack in his armor, a place the bullets and the betrayal had missed. They cut deeper, because they were true. She had asked for nothing. She had just worked. She had just scrubbed the stains. He went back to his study. He found an unopened bottle of cheap bourbon he'd missed. He poured a glass. He stared at it, the amber liquid catching the moonlight. Her words came again. He threw the glass, not in rage, but in a strange, sharp spasm of something. It shattered against the cold fireplace. That night, for the first time in 6 agonizing months, Luca Romano couldn't sleep. He didn't just lie awake, stewing in his own grief. He paced. He walked from his room to the library and down the grand hall, the sound of his boots echoing in the empty mansion. He was haunted, not by the ghosts of his past, but by the whisper of a maid. The sun rose, but it brought no warmth to the house. It only illuminated the dust, the decay, and the long, sleepless night Luca had just endured. Her words, "I didn't ask for anything," had looped in his mind, a sharp, clean counterpoint to the muddy, violent noise of his own grief. It was an unfamiliar sensation, this confusion. He didn't like it. He sat at his desk, the one he had cleared with a single, violent sweep 2 days prior. He had not slept. He had watched the sun come up, a dirty smear of orange and gray over the dead lawn. He rang the small, antique bell on his desk, the sound cutting through the morning silence. "Mrs." Petrov appeared in the doorway, her spine rigid. "Sir?" "Find the new girl," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Bring her to me. Mr. Romano, she's—" "Mrs." Petrov hesitated, a rare sign of uncertainty. "She's finishing her duties. She was preparing to leave." Of course she was. He had told her to leave. He had thrown her eviction notice in her face. He'd expected her to beg, and when she didn't, he'd expected her to run. "I didn't ask where she is. Petrov. I said bring her." "Mrs." Petrov nodded stiffly and was gone. Sophia was in the small, damp room off the kitchen that served as her quarters. She had one small cardboard suitcase, already packed. Her coat was on. She was terrified of the man upstairs, but she was more terrified of what would happen when her landlord found her. Leaving this fortress was walking back into the fire, but she had no choice. She had been fired. When Mrs. Petrov found her, Sophia nearly jumped out of her skin. "He wants to see you," the older woman said, her face unreadable, though her eyes held a trace of pity. "In the study." This was it, Sophia thought, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. He was going to make her beg for her last paycheck. Or maybe he just wanted to yell at her one last time. She picked up her suitcase. "Leave that." "Mrs." Petrov advised. "Whatever this is, don't give him the satisfaction of seeing you've already quit." Sophia set the suitcase down and followed the housekeeper's black-clad form down the long, cold hallway. The study door was open. Luca was standing by the window, staring out. He was a silhouette against the weak morning light. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sir?" she whispered. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. He turned, and she fought the urge to recoil. In the daylight, he looked worse. His eyes were bloodshot, his face shadowed by a heavy, dark stubble. He looked like a man who had wrestled with demons all night and lost. "You didn't leave," he stated. Mrs. Petrov said I told you to go." "Yes, sir, I was going." He stared at her, a long, dissecting gaze that made her feel transparent. He was trying to figure her out. He was a man who understood only 2 types of people, threats and tools. He couldn't decide which one she was. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low. The question caught her off guard. "Here? In your house? In this country? At this house? A girl like you? Scrubbing floors in a place like this? Why?" She looked down at her feet. She could lie. She could invent a story. But looking at the raw, exhausted pain in his face, she found herself telling a sliver of the truth. "I needed a place to hide, sir. A place no one would look for me. Hiding from who? The landlord? He sneered, but the insult lacked the venom of the night before. From a man, she said, her voice barely audible. A man I used to know. He hit you? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a flash of shame. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Luca felt something cold and familiar twist in his gut. Not pity. Recognition. He recognized the look of someone hunted. And the money? He pushed. The rent. I will figure it out. I always do. How? I work. I find a way. I did not ask you for help. I do not want your help. This quiet, infuriating pride. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted everything from him. His money, his protection, his name. Her rejection of it felt like a slap. He moved to his desk, pulled open a heavy drawer, and took out a thick, white envelope. He didn't count it, but she could see the bills inside were hundreds. He tossed it onto the desk. The sound was a soft, heavy thud. Take it, he said. Sophia looked at the envelope. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It was a way out. It was a trap. She knew this kind of money. This kind of money always came with strings. It always came with a price. Diego had given her money like this, and the price had been her body, her freedom, her name. I said, take it, Luca repeated, his voice dropping. She met his gaze. He saw the tremor in her hands, but her eyes were steady. She shook her head. A small, definite movement. No, sir. He couldn't believe it. It's not a request. It's a command. You work for me. You will take your payment. That is not my payment. That is something else. Use it, he growled, stepping closer, looming over her. Use it or leave, right now. Walk out that door and don't come back. He was testing her. He was testing himself. He wanted her to take it, to prove she was like everyone else, a problem that money could solve. Sophia held his gaze for a long, vibrating second. The air crackled with his anger and her fear. Then, without a single word, she turned her back on him, on the money and on the desk, and walked out of the study. Luca was left alone, his command hanging in the empty, silent room. He stared at the envelope. He was stunned. He was not a man who was easily stunned. He was a man who gave orders and was obeyed. He sank into his chair, the fog of his grief suddenly pierced by a sharp, bright ray of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He found himself, for the first time in a very long time, wanting to know what happened next. A few days passed. The house settled into a new, uneasy rhythm. Sophia did not leave. Luca did not fire her. She simply stayed. She cleaned. She worked. She kept her head down. And he watched her. He watched her from the shadows of his own house. He watched her hang sheets in the yard, her small form battling the heavy, wet linens. He watched her polish the grand staircase, her movements methodical and sure. He started to notice things. She never wasted a movement. She never wasted food, always eating the scraps left in the kitchen, never complaining. And he noticed the fear. She was always listening. Every time a car approached on the long, gravel drive, her head would lift, her hands would still, and she would hold her breath until it passed. She wasn't just hiding from a man. She was hiding from a ghost. His own ghosts, however, were not content to stay in the past. He was in the library, a room he rarely used. When he saw the van, it was a black, nondescript panel van, the kind that blends in everywhere. It was parked half a mile down the private access road, just visible through the trees. It sat there for an hour. The next day, it was back. Luca's blood, sluggish for months, began to move faster. He wasn't paranoid. He was a professional. He knew what a scout looked for. He knew what a windy city plumbing van meant when it sat for hours where there were no pipes. A former rival, a man named Petrucci, had been trying to claim his old territory. Petrucci was a jackal, a coward who only moved when he smelled weakness. The rumors of Luca's collapse had made him brave. Luca said nothing to Mrs. Petrov. He didn't call the few men still loyal to him. He simply went to the locked room in his basement. He cleaned his guns. He checked the perimeter alarms, reactivating sensors that had been dormant for months. He prepared, silently, for the violence he knew was coming. He felt the old, cold calm settle over him. It was almost a relief. That night, the rain came, a cold, driving storm that lashed the windows and turned the grounds to mud. Misses. Petrov and the other daily staff had gone home hours ago. The house was a ship lost in a sea of darkness. Sophia was in the main kitchen, wiping down the last of the steel counters. It was late, past 10. She hated the kitchen at night. The floors creaked, and the wind howled in the chimneys like a dying animal. She was just about to turn off the lights when she heard it. A hard, fast knock. Not at the main door, but at the kitchen service entrance. Her blood turned to ice. She froze. No one came to this door. Ever. The knock came again, more insistent. "Delivery! I got a package for Romano. Signature required." A delivery? This late? In this storm? A small, stupid part of her, the part that still wanted to be a good employee, made her move, maybe misses. Petrov had ordered something. "Just leave it," she called out, her voice trembling. "Can't, got a sign. Come on, lady, it's freezing out here." She crept to the door. She looked through the small, fogged peephole. All she could see was a yellow rain slicker. The man's head ducked down. She fumbled with the deadbolt. It was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake the second she did it. She cracked the door open just an inch, ready to tell him to leave the package. The man shoved it open with brutal force, sending her staggering backward. He was not a delivery driver. He was large, soaked from the rain, and his eyes were hard and bright. He wasn't the man from the plumbing van. He was someone else. He had a small, coiled wire in his hand. "Where is he?" the man snarled, grabbing the front of her thin blouse, yanking her toward him. "Where is the boss?" Sophia opened her mouth to scream, but only a choked, terrified sound came out. "Upstairs? Is he alone? Talk, you stupid!" The man never finished his sentence. Luca had been in the library, not drinking, just watching the drive. He saw the black van, its lights off, roll to a stop just outside the main gate. He saw a figure jump out and sprint toward the house, avoiding the drive, sticking to the trees. He knew they were coming for the service entrance. He didn't run. He moved with a speed and silence that belied his size. He had a 9mm in his hand, but he didn't need it. Not for this. The man in the kitchen didn't hear him. He was too focused on Sophia, on his mission. Luca entered the room just as the man raised his hand to strike her. There was no sound, no warning. Luca took 3 long, fast strides. He grabbed the man's head from behind with one massive hand covering his mouth with his other arm. He locked around the man's throat, lifting him off his feet. It was not a fight. It was an execution. The intruder's feet kicked uselessly. His hands clawed at Luca's arm. Sophia watched, her back pressed hard against the pantry door, her hand over her own mouth. The sounds were awful. A wet, choked gasp. The pop of cartilage. Luca held the man, his face a mask of cold, concentrated rage, until the kicking stopped. He let the body drop. It hit the immaculate tile floor with a heavy, final thud. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain and Sophia's harsh, ragged breathing. Luca turned to her. He was covered in sweat, his chest heaving. He expected her to be screaming, to be hysterical, to be running. She was just standing there. Her entire body was shaking, a leaf in a hurricane, but she was standing. Her eyes were huge and black, fixed on the body. Then, she lifted her gaze to his. She looked at the man who had just taken a life in front of her. She took one shuddering breath and whispered, "Thank you." Luca stared at her. Thank you. He had just killed a man in his kitchen. He had shown her the monster he was, the animal they all whispered about, and she thanked him. The adrenaline began to drain, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar spike of fear. Not for himself, for her. They had seen her. They knew she was here. He strode toward her and grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. He wasn't shouting. "You will not open the doors. For anyone. You will not go outside. You will not leave this house. Do you understand me?" She just nodded, her eyes still locked on his. She didn't flinch from his grip. His voice was a low, desperate rasp. Do you understand me, Sophia? It was the first time he had ever used her name. The next day, the house was a tomb. The body was gone. The floor was bleached. Mrs. Petrov, who had arrived to find a grim-faced Luka and a silent, pale Sophia, asked no questions. She simply worked. Luka found Sophia in the laundry room that afternoon. She was folding towels, her movements jerky and small. He knew she was crying. Though she made no sound, he had seen his mother cry this way, silently, so his father wouldn't hear. He stood in the doorway, a large, awkward shadow in the bright, sterile room. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to be a person. He can't hurt you, he said, the words sounding stupid to his own ears. She shook her head, not looking at him, and scrubbed at her face with the back of her hand. It's not that. What is it, then? She finally turned, and her face was a ruin of quiet despair. I have no one. You have this house. You have guns. You have power. She looked down at her own hands. I have nothing. If I disappear, no one will look for me. There is no one to call. No mother, no brother, no family, no one. He looked at her. This small, broken thing that had refused his money and thanked him for a murder. He saw her absolute, crushing loneliness, and it resonated with his own. He was surrounded by ghosts, but he was, in essence, just as alone as she was. He looked away, at the white, sterile walls of the laundry room. That makes two of us. He left her there. But something had changed. The small, irritating snag of her existence had become something else, a connection, a thin, frayed wire in the dark. He started eating in the kitchen. He'd storm in, long after Mrs. Petrov had left and find Sophia there, eating a small, late-night meal at the massive central table. He wouldn't say a word. He would just pull his own cold tray from the refrigerator, take a seat at the extreme opposite end of the 20-foot table, and eat. The silence was monumental. It was just the sound of two forks scraping on ceramic, two lonely people existing in the same space, separated by a sea of polished wood. For Sophia, it was terrifying. For Luka, it was grounding. The storm that broke the silence came a week later. It was a real Chicago monster, a thunderstorm that ripped trees from the ground and sent the sky into a flashing, epileptic fit. A crack of lightning, louder than a gunshot, struck a transformer down the road. The house lights flickered, buzzed, and died. Luka was in his study, staring into an unlit fireplace. A bottle of whiskey, his only companion. The sudden, primitive darkness didn't bother him. It matched his mood. He heard a noise, a soft scrape. He turned, his hand instinctively going to the gun he now kept at his belt. Sophia stood in the doorway. She was holding a single, flickering candle. The flame illuminated her face, making her eyes look like deep, dark pools. In her other hand, she held a tray. The generators are out, she whispered, as if the darkness demanded quiet. The stove is gas. I made soup. She stepped into the room. He watched her. She moved with a strange grace in the flickering light. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a victim. She was Sophia. She set the tray on the low table in front of him, a bowl of steaming vegetable soup and a piece of bread. He hadn't realized he was starving. She didn't leave. She surprised him by sitting, not in the chair opposite him, but on the cold hearth, a safe distance away. She just held her candle, the wax dripping onto a small saucer. You should eat, she said. He picked up the spoon. The soup was hot, simple, and real. They sat in silence for a long time, just the sound of the storm outside and him eating. He finished. He set the bowl down. Why aren't you afraid of me? He asked the shadows. She looked at the candle flame. Not at him. I am. You have a funny way of showing it. I'm afraid of what you can do, she said, her voice soft but clear. But you were not the one who hunted me. You were not the one who hurt me. The man at the door. He was like him. But you. She looked at him. You were the one who stopped him. He had no answer for that. Why did you stay? He asked, his own voice rough. After that night, you told me not to leave the house, she said, a tiny ghost of a smile playing on her lips. I am very good at following orders. Most of the time. He watched her. He watched the way the light played on her face, the way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. He watched her lips as she spoke. For the first time in a year, maybe longer, Luca Romano wasn't thinking about the past. He wasn't obsessing over the betrayal or the blood or the brother he'd lost. He was just watching a woman's mouth move as she talked about the weather and the dead herbs in the garden and the strange noises the old house made, and for the first time in ages, he truly listened. The quiet that had settled between Luca and Sofia was a fragile thing, a thin sheet of ice over a dark, deep lake. It was the calm of the truce, not the calm of peace. It lasted another week. Then, a car crunched up the gravel drive. It wasn't a black van. It was an old, rattling Lincoln town car, the kind favored by men whose time had passed. Sofia, who was weeding a long-dead garden patch near the drive, froze. Luca was at his study window. He saw her reaction first, the way she hunched, ready to bolt. Then he saw the car. He knew it. He knew the driver, Vince the Bone Bianchi. A man who had been his father's consigliere and Luca's burden. Vince was old, weary, and, Luca had thought, retired. Luca met him on the porch, a barrier of stone and shadow. Vince looked smaller than Luca remembered, his expensive suit hanging on his thin frame. "You're not an easy man to find, Luca," Vince wheezed, his eyes scanning the crumbling facade. "That's the point. Vince, what do you want?" Vince didn't flinch. He'd been taking abuse from Romanos for 50 years. "The territory, it's gone. Petrucci, that jackal, he overextended, he's finished." Luca said nothing. He didn't care about the territory. "There's a new player," Vince continued, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "He united the families, cleaned up Petrucci's mess in 3 weeks. He has your old network. Luca. All of it." Luca's face was stone. "Good for him. You don't understand," Vince hissed, grabbing Luca's arm, a shocking act of familiarity. "It's Matteo. It's Matteo Salvi." The name hit Luca like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. Matteo, the weasel. A skinny, ambitious kid from the docks whom Luca had taken in. A boy he'd treated like a kid brother, long before Nico was old enough to count. Matteo, who had been caught skimming, who had gotten on his knees in this very study, weeping and begging Luca for mercy. Luca had let him live. He had banished him, spat on him, and let him live. "Matteo," Luca repeated, the name tasting like ash. "He's not a kid anymore. He's smart, he's patient, and he's consolidated everything. He thinks you're dead, but when he finds out you're just broken, he'll come to finish the job. He won't stop until he has everything that was ever yours." Luca pulled his arm from Vince's grip. His voice was dead. "Get off my property, Vince." "Luca, he won't show mercy this time. You taught him that mercy is weakness. Now," Vince stared at him, his old eyes full of pity and fear. He nodded slowly, turned, and shuffled back to his rattling car. Luca watched him drive away. He brushed it off. But the old man was right. He was rattled, the foundation of his grief, which had been a passive, drowning thing, now had a focal point. Matteo Salvi, the boy he'd spared, the boy who had learned all the wrong lessons. The ghost in the manor woke up. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He went to the basement. Sofia, wiping down the kitchen cabinets, heard the distant metallic scrape of the armory door. It was a sound she had never heard before. He spent 2 days in the dark. He cleaned weapons, oiled mechanisms, and counted ammunition. He walked the perimeter of the estate, his boots sinking into the mud. He noted the weaknesses, the broken fence in the back, the rotted-out window frame in the old stable. He checked the escape routes, pulling back ancient, cobweb-covered tapestries in the library to reveal the iron doors of the tunnels his grandfather had built. He was a general planning a war, but he was an army of one. Sofia watched him. She saw the new electric tension in his body. This was not the broken man crying in his study. This was not the lonely man eating soup in the dark. This was something else. This was the monster she had only heard rumors about, and he was pacing his cage, She did not know what to do. She could not clean this mess. She could not scrub it off a statue. She saw him examine the kitchen service door, the one the intruder had come through. He'd replaced the lock, but he shook his head, testing the frame with his fist. It was weak. The next day, while he was in the basement, she went to the old, disused tool shed. She found a hammer, a box of long nails, and a drill. She found thick oak boards in the collapsing stable. Mrs. Petrov found her an hour later, on her knees by the service door, hammering a 2x4 into the frame. "What are you doing, child?" the housekeeper demanded. "It's weak," Sophia said, not stopping. She winced as she missed the nail head and hit her thumb, but she didn't cry out. She just reset the nail and struck again. She spent the rest of the day fortifying the house. She boarded the lower windows of the service wing. She changed the flimsy locks on the pantry's cellar. In her small room, she took a canvas bag and created a small kit, a bottle of water, the thick roll of bandages and tape she'd found in an old first aid box, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a small, sharp paring knife from the kitchen. Luca came up from the armory as the sun was setting. The house was cold. He was walking toward the kitchen, his mind full of kill boxes and sightlines. When he stopped, he saw the new, heavy bolt she had installed on the service door. He saw the thick oak boards she had nailed over the vulnerable window in the laundry room. He saw the hammer and box of scattered nails on the floor, where she had left them. He touched the fresh, splintered wood. She hadn't done it with skill. The nails were crooked, the boards uneven. She had done it with pure, stubborn determination. He found the emergency kit later, tucked on a low shelf in the pantry. He opened it. Bandages, water, a knife. He had expected her to run. The moment real, named danger, had arrived. He had expected her to vanish. Instead, she'd picked up a hammer. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread in his chest. It was not love. It was not even affection. It was admiration. It was the rarest of all feelings for him. He was not alone in this fight. Mrs. Petrov, seeing the shift in the house, had quietly added the master's bedroom to Sophia's duties. It was a test for both of them. Sophia entered his room with trepidation. It smelled like him, like whiskey, an old paper, and the cold, metallic scent of his skin. It was a room devoid of life, dark, heavy furniture, a bed that looked like it had not been slept in. On the nightstand, buried under a stack of dusty books, was a silver frame, face down. She knew she shouldn't. It was his. It was private, but her hand moved on its own. She picked it up, the silver cold against her fingers, and turned it over. It was Luca, but it was not her Luca. This man was smiling, a wide, genuine smile that lit up his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. He was younger, his hair shorter, and he was wearing a white shirt, incongruously bright, in his arms. He was holding a little boy, no older than 5, who was laughing, his arms wrapped tight around Luca's neck. A ghost of a smile touched Sophia's own lips. She had not known a face this hard was capable of such light. "What are you doing?" The voice was ice. She gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. She fumbled the frame. Luca stood in the doorway. He was not the man in the picture. He was the monster from the courtyard. His face was dark with a rage she had not seen since that first day. I was just... He moved in 2 strides, his hand lashing out. He did not hit her. He snatched the picture frame from her hand, his fingers crushing hers in the process. "Get out! Mr. Romano, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I said, get out," he roared, and he swept his arm across the nightstand, sending the books and a heavy lamp crashing to the floor. Sophia fled. He found her hours later, in the kitchen, of course. It was their place of confession and conflict. She was scrubbing a pot that was already clean, her shoulders shaking. He stood in the doorway. The rage was gone, burned out, leaving only the cold, gray ash of his shame. He had terrified her, the one person who wasn't terrified of him. "The boy," he said, his voice a rasp. She stopped scrubbing. She didn't turn. His name was Leo. He walked into the room but kept his distance, leaning against the far counter. "He was my nephew, Nico's boy." He stared at the floor. "He was in the car with him. When it happened, in the ambush..." Sophia turned, her face pale, her eyes wide with a pain that was not for herself, but for him. They didn't just take my brother, Luca whispered, the words tearing out of him. They took the kid. He was just a kid. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollowed out, showing her the vast, empty chasm inside him. Everyone who's ever loved me ends up dead. My father, my brother, his son. It's a curse. Everyone I touch, everyone who gets close, they end up in the ground. He was warning her. He was warning himself. Sophia looked at this great, broken man, this killer who was weeping without tears. She walked across the kitchen, her steps soft. She stood in front of him, close enough that he could have wrapped his hands around her throat. She looked up at him, her dark eyes clear and absolute. She whispered, "That's not love's fault." His world, which had been tilting, suddenly stopped. He stared at her. It was the simplest, most profound thing anyone had ever said to him. It was an absolution he didn't deserve. That night, the storm that had been threatening for days finally broke. It was a violent biblical deluge. The power, already weak, flickered and died, plunging the house into a primal, roaring darkness. Luca was in the wine cellar, looking for a bottle old enough to kill the new pain. He heard a sound on the stone steps behind him. It was Sophia, holding a flashlight. The wind, she said, her voice trembling. It blew the pantry door open and the main cellar door. Just as she spoke, a colossal gust of wind hammered the house, the heavy, iron-clad wine cellar door, which had been balanced precariously on its ancient hinges, slammed shut with the sound of a cannon. The flashlight beam caught the iron handle on the inside as it snapped, the metal sheared and broken. They were trapped. "Well," Luca said into the darkness, his voice surprisingly calm. He lit a candle with an old lighter from his pocket, the cellar filled with a flickering, sickly yellow light. "This is a problem." Sophia ran to the door, pulling on the broken handle. We are locked in." "Yes," Luca said. He picked a bottle of wine, a 1961 Barolo. "Looks like we are." He sat on a wooden crate. He opened the bottle with a corkscrew he kept on a shelf. He took a long drink, straight from the bottle. Sophia paced. She was trapped in a cold, dark room with him, a man of violence, and 1,000 bottles of wine. She was terrified. He watched her. "He'll come for you. You know." She stopped pacing. "Who?" "Matteo. He'll find out you're here. He'll see you as mine. He will want to take you, just to prove he can." "I am not yours," she whispered, her back to him. "He won't see the difference." He took another drink. "You should have run. Sophia, when Vince was here, you should have packed your bag and run." "Where?" she asked, turning on him, her voice suddenly sharp. "Where was I supposed to run? Back to the landlord? Back to the man I was hiding from? You think your ghosts are the only ones in the world?" He was silent. She sagged, her anger gone. She slid down the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The cellar was cold. They sat in silence for a long time. An hour, 2. He drank. She watched. "You're going to drink all of it, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft. "It's my cellar. You will have a very bad head in the morning," she murmured, "and you will be very mean." He looked at her. A strange, rusty sound rumbled in his chest. It was a laugh. It was a painful, unused thing, but it was a laugh. Probably. The alcohol, the close quarters, the confession. It had all lowered his defenses. He wasn't a boss. She wasn't a maid. They were just two people trapped in the dark. He set the bottle down and moved. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, but he sat near her. He held out the bottle. "You look cold." She shook her head. "No." He took another drink. "That's not love's fault." He repeated her words, his voice a low rumble. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," she said. "Love doesn't kill. Men do." He looked at her. The candlelight carving shadows into his face. He saw her, really saw her. Not the fear, not the defiance, just her. He leaned in. He was so close he could feel the warmth of her breath, smell the scent of soap and fear. He stopped, giving her time to pull away. She didn't move. His mouth found hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and full of his entire broken, grieving soul. His hand came up, his fingers rough, tangling in her hair, gripping her head as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. He kissed her like he was starving, like he was drowning, and she was the last bit of air on earth. He tasted the wine on his own lips and the salt of... He didn't know if they were his tears or hers. Then he pulled back. He wrenched himself away, his chest heaving. The curse. Leo's face. Nico. "No," he rasped, his eyes screwed shut. "I can't. I'll destroy you." He felt her hand, a small, trembling hand, on his cheek. His eyes snapped open. Sophia was looking at him. She was not afraid. She was not a victim. Her eyes were clear, and they were full of a terrible, beautiful, defiant strength. She leaned in. Her lips touched his. This time, there was no violence. This time, it was a choice. It was slow, it was a question, and an answer. His hands, which had gripped her, now held her. His thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. Her kiss was a promise. It was not the healing. It was the medicine. They stayed there, in the dark, for a long time. They didn't go further. The kiss was too profound, too heavy. It was enough. He pulled her against his side, his arm wrapping around her. She was so small. He covered them both with his large, discarded coat. They sat on the cold stone floor, leaned against the wall, and for the first time in months, Luca was not alone with his ghosts. They just slept. When he woke, the light was gray. Morning was filtering through a high, dirty cellar window he'd never noticed. The door was open, and she was gone. He sat up, his body aching, his head pounding. He was alone. The empty bottle lay on its side. He thought, for a desperate, panicked second, that he had dreamed it, that he had finally broken. He stood, his bones cracking. He walked out of the cellar, up the stairs, through the silent kitchen. He expected the house to be empty. He expected her bag to be gone. He went to his study. On the desk, where he had once thrown her eviction notice, was a tray, a glass of water, 2 aspirin, a piece of toast. And next to it, on a small piece of paper ripped from a kitchen notepad, was a note. 2 words, written in a small, neat, hesitant hand. "You're not alone?" Luca stared at the note. 2 words. You're not alone. He hadn't been. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he had slept. Truly slept. Not the liquor-drenched oblivion or the fitful, nightmare-haunted dozing, but a deep, restorative rest. He had woken to the cold, the ache in his bones, and the immediate panicked realization that she was gone. He had thought, for one searing, hollow moment, that the cellar, the kiss, the confession, all of it had been a hallucination, a final, desperate trick of a mind steeped in grief and isolation. But the note was real. The toast was real. The aspirin was real. She was real. And that, he realized, was a problem. A beautiful, terrible, and infinitely dangerous problem. The whisper of admiration he'd felt for her, the spark of defiant life, had been fanned by the darkness of the cellar into something bright and hot. It made him feel, and in his world, feeling was a liability. Feeling got people killed. He left the tray on his desk. He did not take the aspirin. The pounding in his head was a righteous punishment, a reminder. But he couldn't get the image of her face out of his mind, the way she had looked at him, not with fear, but with a strength that matched his own. He spent the day in a new kind of fog. He was a man with a purpose, but no plan. He was a killer with no one to kill. He was a king with a kingdom of one. And he suddenly, desperately, wanted to protect her. He had to know what and who was coming. He did something he had not done since the ambush. He made a call. He used an old encrypted satellite phone he kept in a lead-lined box in the armory. The voice that answered on the other end was rusty, surprised, but ultimately loyal. "I need information," Luca said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Matteo Salvi, everything, who he's with, where he sleeps, and who he talks to." "Luca? Boss. Is that you? They said you were, "Now," Luca commanded, and the line went quiet as the man on the other end, a man who owed Luca his life, went to work. The information came 2 days later, not as a call, but as a dead-drop data file, which Luca retrieved from a hollowed-out fence post at the edge of his property. He sat at his desk, the house silent around him, and plugged the drive into a hardened laptop. It was all there. Matteo's operations, his safe houses, his new lieutenants, and his messages. Luca scrolled through transcripts of intercepted calls, his blood cooling with every line. Matteo was meticulous. He was building a new empire from the ashes of Luca's old one. And then he saw her name. It wasn't Sofia. It was just a note in a transcript, a conversation between Matteo and an underling. Matteo: "What about the loose end, the one from Chicago, the puta?" Underling: "Diego says he's close. He's been tracking her for months, thinks he's found the general area, some big estate outside the city. He wants more men, says she's protected." Matteo: "Diego is a dog, a useful one. He finds her. He can have her. But I want the man who's protecting her. Find out who it is. If it's who I think it is, send Diego a bonus, and then send the cleaners." Luca's vision went red. He didn't just see the words, he saw the implication. Diego, the man she was hiding from. He was working for Matteo, and he had led them here. He had painted a target on the one thing in Luca's life that he was not willing to lose. The rage was a physical thing. It was a white-hot, blinding inferno that rose from his gut and choked him. He swept the laptop from the desk, sending it smashing against the stone fireplace. He wanted to kill. He wanted to tear Diego apart with his bare hands. He wanted to burn Matteo's new empire to the ground with him in it. He stormed out of the study. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to find her. He found her in the laundry room, folding the same sheets she had hung in the wind weeks ago. "Who is Diego?" The words were not a question. They were an accusation, a growl that ripped from his chest. Sofia dropped the sheet she was holding. She spun around, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a terror he had not seen since the night in the kitchen. What did you say?" she whispered. "Diego!" he roared, taking a step toward her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You told me you were hiding from a man. You didn't tell me he was working for Matteo Salvi. You didn't tell me you were the one who led them here." Her face crumpled. This was not a confession. It was a breaking. No, he... How? "He's been tracking you. He's working for them. They know you're here. Sofia, they're coming for you." He expected her to lie, to make excuses. Instead, she just broke. The quiet, stubborn strength he admired vanished, and she collapsed in on herself, sliding down the wall to sit on the cold tile floor, her hands covering her face. A single, racking sob tore out of her. I didn't know," she wept, her voice muffled by her hands. "I swear, I didn't know he was with anyone. I ran." "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice still loud, but the rage was cracking, showing the raw fear beneath. "Why didn't you tell me his name?" She looked up at him, her face a ruin, streaked with tears. "Tell you," she cried, her voice rising in a desperate, broken, hysterical pitch. "Tell you? The man in the big house, the man with guns. And say what? Excuse me, sir, but there is a very bad man looking for me. He's a drug runner. He's a monster. Please, add my problems to your own?" She scrambled to her feet, her small body vibrating with a pain that was suddenly, terribly, equal to his own. "I didn't want you to think I was trouble," she screamed at him. "I didn't want you to throw me out. I just wanted a place to be safe for 1 week. I just wanted to be invisible. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for you." The last word hung in the air, a final, desperate admission. The rage, the fire, all of it vanished. It was doused by the cold, clear water of her pain. He saw her, not as a liability, but as a mirror of his own broken, hunted self. He stepped forward. He did not grab her. He did not shake her. He put his hands on her shoulders, and he held her. She fought him for a second, her small fists beating uselessly against his chest, her sobs tearing out of her. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "Stop." His voice was a low command, but it was not angry. It was heavy. He pulled her against his chest, his large arms wrapping around her, one hand coming up to tangle in her hair, holding her head against his heart. He just held her, absorbing the tremors, the sobs, the terror, until she was just a shaking, exhausted weight in his arms. He was breathing hard, not from exertion but from the force of the emotion he was holding back. He wanted to storm out of the house, find Diego, and end him. He wanted to call his old contacts and start a war, but he didn't. He physically restrained himself, a shudder passing through his massive frame. He held on to her. When her sobs finally quieted into hiccuping breaths, he loosened his hold, but he didn't let go. He tilted her chin up with his thumb, forcing her to look at him. He kissed her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a brand, a promise, an absolution. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "I am the trouble. Not you. I am the killer. I am the monster. I am the one they are coming for." He looked into her red-rimmed, swollen eyes, and he told her the truth, the one that had been sitting in his chest since he'd found her note. "For 6 months, I have been sitting in this house, waiting to die. I didn't care. I wanted it. And then you—" He shook his head, a small, pained movement. "You and your stupid, stubborn pride, you and your vinegar and your soup, and your goddamn note." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You're the reason I stopped wanting to die. Sophia, do you understand that? You're the reason I want to live." She stared at him, her lips parted, her breath caught in her throat. "And they are not taking you from me," he whispered, a vow that was more sacred than any prayer. "I won't let them." The next 24 hours were a blur. Luca was a changed man. The fog of grief was gone, burned away by the cold fire of purpose. He took Sophia by the hand. "Come with me." He led her through the house, down to the library. He pulled the heavy, ancient tapestry from the wall, revealing the iron door. He opened it, revealing not a tunnel, but a small, steel-reinforced room. It was a Prohibition-era panic room, still stocked with canned water and medical supplies. "If I am not with you," he said, his voice all business, "if you hear gunfire, you come here, you lock this door. It will not open from the outside. You wait. You do not come out for anyone but me. Do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes huge. He then took her to the armory. He placed a small, lightweight .38 revolver in her hand. Her hand was so small, the gun looked enormous. I can't." "You will," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He stood behind her, his large body enveloping hers. He wrapped his hand over her smaller one, his thumb guiding hers. "This is the safety. This is how you hold it. You point. You pull the trigger. You don't stop pulling until the man who is trying to hurt you falls down." She was trembling. "Luca, I pray to God you never have to use it," he said, his lips near her ear. "But I am done with prayers. You will keep this with you always." He put 2 men on the gate, old-timers, men he had trusted with his life, men who had been living quiet lives of retirement. He called them, and they came. He didn't tell Sophia about them. He didn't want her to feel like a prisoner, but she was. They were prisoners in his fortress, waiting for the siege. That night, the house was a different kind of quiet. It was not empty. It was full. It was full of anticipation, of fear, and of a strange, electric energy. Neither of them could eat. Neither of them could sleep. Luca was in his study, cleaning the revolver for her. When she appeared in the doorway, she was wearing a simple, white cotton nightgown. She looked small and clean and terrifyingly fragile. I can't be alone," she whispered. He looked at her. He saw the gun in her hand, held loosely at her side. He saw the terror in her eyes. He stood up. He walked to her, and he gently took the gun from her hand, placing it on his desk. He did not speak. He just held out his hand. She looked at his hand, large, calloused, scarred, a killer's hand. She put her small, trembling hand into his. He led her from the study, up the grand staircase, to his room, the room she had fled in shame. He closed the door, and the click of the lock seemed to seal them off from the rest of the world. The only light was from the moon, streaming in through the tall windows. He didn't move. He just stood there, his back to the door, and looked at her. She was a pale, beautiful ghost in the moonlight. "Sophia," he whispered. It was not a prayer. It was a plea. He moved toward her, and his hands, the same hands that had just taught her how to kill, were trembling. He raised one, and he gently, so gently, touched her face. He traced the line of her cheekbone with his thumb, as if he were memorizing her, as if she were a dream he was afraid of waking from. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, a single, quiet tear escaping and rolling onto his thumb. He kissed the tear. His lips were rough and warm and hesitant. He kissed her eyelid. He kissed her temple, and then he kissed her mouth. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the seller. This was a kiss of starvation. It was the kiss of two people who had been dying for years and had just found the antidote in each other's mouths. It was slow. It was deep. It was a desperate, silent conversation. His hands moved from her face to her shoulders, to her arms, pulling her closer, until there was no space between them, just the thin cotton of her nightgown. He moaned, a low, pained sound in the back of his throat, and he buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. "You're real," he murmured. "You're real." "I'm here," she whispered, her arms sliding around his thick neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, holding on as if he were the only thing keeping her from floating away. He lifted her. She was weightless in his arms. He carried her to the bed and laid her down on the heavy, dark comforter. He did not release her. He followed her down, his body a heavy, protective weight over hers, his lips never leaving hers. He unbuttoned her nightgown, his fingers fumbling, clumsy. He, who could disassemble a complex weapon in the dark, could barely manage 3 simple pearl buttons. She smiled against his mouth, a small, watery smile, and her own hands came up to help him. The first sound was the shattering of glass, a sudden, violent explosion from the floor below that ripped the sacred silence of the bedroom apart. Luca was moving before he was awake. The man who had been trembling, who had been whispering her name like a prayer, was gone. In his place was a creature of pure, cold instinct. He rolled off the bed, pulling her with him, his body shielding hers as a second and third gunshot ripped through the night, the reports echoing from the grand staircase. "Stay down," he roared, his voice a guttural command. He was already moving, grabbing his discarded pants, pulling them on, his gun, the one he always kept on the nightstand, already in his hand. "The study," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The safe room. Go, now." "No, I'm not leaving you," Sophia was scrambling, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest, grabbing the gun he had given her. "Damn it, Sophia!" He grabbed her arm, his grip a band of steel. "This isn't a request." He dragged her out of the bedroom. The hallway was dark, but downstairs, the front hall was lit by the strobing. Terrifying flashes of muzzle fire. The men at the gate. They were gone. His men. Dead. The realization hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't slow. He half shoved, half carried her toward the library. The attack wasn't a scout, it wasn't a probe, it was an army. Matteo. He'd brought a goddamned army. "The tunnel," he said, changing his mind. "The safe room was a trap if they took the house. We go to the tunnel. Stay behind me." He led the way, his gun up. The house was a war zone. He could hear men shouting, their voices unfamiliar, echoing in his house. They reached the library. He shoved the tapestry aside, his hand reaching for the iron handle of the tunnel door. A shadow detached itself from the doorway of the dining room. A man in dark tactical gear. Luca didn't hesitate. He shoved Sophia behind him and fired twice. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The man crumpled. Luca didn't look back. He yanked the tunnel door open. "In! Go!" Sophia scrambled into the blackness. It was a narrow, stone-lined passage, smelling of damp earth and rot. Luca followed her in, pulling the heavy door shut, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. "Here," he said, his voice a low breath beside her. He fumbled, and a high-powered flashlight beam cut through the black, illuminating a path that sloped down. "Move, fast, don't look back." He pushed her ahead. They ran, their footsteps echoing. His heavy boots, her bare feet. She was still in the nightgown. The thin cotton a pathetic defense against the cold. "Wait," he hissed. He stopped, pulling her back against his chest, his free hand covering her mouth. He snapped the flashlight off. Darkness, silence, and then, from the way they had come, a sound, the scrape of the iron door. They hadn't been fast enough. Someone had seen them. "Get down," he whispered, pushing her into an alcove, a small recess in the stone. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound. Luca, do it." He clicked the safety off his gun, and he waited. The beam of a flashlight bounced down the tunnel. One man, then two. "I saw him, I tell ya," a voice whispered. "The old man and a girl. Matteo wants the girl," the second voice said. "He wants her. Alive. The boss. He don't care about." Luca closed his eyes. He let his breath out, slow and steady. The beast was here. The first man passed the alcove. The second man, the one who had spoken, was just a few feet away. Luca moved. He exploded from the alcove. He was not a man. He was a force, a 200-pound instrument of rage. He didn't use his gun. It was too loud. He grabbed the second man from behind, his hand clamping over his mouth, his other arm locking around his throat. It was the same move he had used in the kitchen. The man's partner whirled, but he was too slow. Luca pulled the man in front of him, using him as a shield. The first man fired, his shot wild, the bullet screaming off the stone. Luca, his face a mask of cold fury, put 2 rounds into the first man's chest. The man fell. The man in Luca's arms was choking, struggling. Luca ended it. A single, brutal snap. He let the body fall. He stood, his chest heaving in the beam of the fallen flashlight, and that's when the third man, the one who had been lagging behind, fired from the darkness. It was not a loud bang. It was a hot, searing, impossible pain. A fist of white-hot iron slammed into his left shoulder. He roared, a sound of pure, animalistic rage and agony, and he fell to one knee. He raised his own gun and emptied the clip into the darkness where the shot had come from. A scream, a gurgle, the thud of a body. Silence. "Luca!" Sophia was at his side, her hands on him, her face a pale oval of terror in the dim light. "You're hit." "It's nothing, He lied, gritting his teeth. The flashlight beam showed the blood. It was not nothing. It was a lot. The front of his shirt was already dark, the blood pumping, hot and fast. He tried to stand and his leg buckled. The blood loss was happening too fast. "Here," he said, shoving his gun at her. He'll be empty." He fumbled at his belt, his good hand shaking. "The clip. Take the clip. Reload it. Now. Sophia, I don't know how," she cried, her hands trembling so hard she could barely hold the heavy weapon. "Yes, you do," he snarled, the pain making his voice a blade. "I showed you. Eject the magazine. Bottom, push the button." Her fingers fumbled. A click. The empty magazine fell to the stone floor. He shoved a full one from his pocket into her palm. "In hard." She was sobbing, tears streaming down her face, but she did it. She slammed the clip into the gun. Now what? Pull the slide, the top, pull it back, hard. She gritted her teeth, her small hands struggling with the heavy spring. "I can't. Do it." She screamed, a sound of pure frustration and fear, and she yanked it back. A click, a single, beautiful bullet was now in the chamber. He grabbed the wall and hauled himself to his feet, his arms screaming. "Good girl, let's go. You can't." "I can," he said, and he put his good arm around her, leaning on her. "The stables. There's an exit. Move." They half ran, half stumbled through the dark, Luca leaning his weight on her, leaving a dark, wet trail. They came to a rusted iron ladder. "Up," he gasped, the word a puff of white in the cold. She climbed. He followed, his one good arm taking his entire weight. The pain in his shoulder was a universe. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. At the top. She shoved at a heavy wooden trapdoor. It opened into the back of an old horse stall. They fell out onto the damp, musty-smelling hay. They were in the abandoned stables. Luca collapsed, his back sliding down the rotting wood. He was done. "No!" he panted as Sophia tried to haul him up. "No! Lock the door!" Sophia ran to the heavy stable doors, slamming the thick wooden bar into place. It wouldn't hold against an army, but it would hold for a minute. She ran back to him. He was pale, his skin clammy in the moonlight streaming through the broken roof. The front of his shirt was a black, glistening mass. He was bleeding out. "Oh, God, Luca, no!" she wept, pressing her hands to the wound. He roared in pain, shoving her away. "The kit!" he gasped, his eyes beginning to glaze. "In my pocket. Your kit." She fumbled in his coat. He had taken her emergency kit. She pulled it out. What do I do?" "Stitch. Need stitch," he panted. "The bottle in the kit. Antiseptic." She pulled out the small bottle of antiseptic and the roll of bandages, and the needle and thread she had packed for mending clothes. "No," he whispered, fumbling, his good hand pulling the small paring knife from the kit. Heat the knife, the lighter, pocket." She found his lighter. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely spark it. She held the flame to the tip of the knife until it glowed red. Cut the shirt," he ordered. She did, slicing the bloody fabric away. The wound was a nightmare, a deep, ragged hole. "Now," he pissed, his body rigid. "The needle. Luca, I can't. I'm not a doctor. I'll hurt you." You'll hurt me if you don't," he said, his voice fading. "I'm bleeding. Out. Sophia, do it." She threaded the needle, her tears blinding her. She poured the antiseptic directly into the wound. Luca screamed. It was a strangled, terrible sound that tore through the night, a sound that no one but her would ever hear. He arched off the floor, his body convulsing, and then fell back, unconscious. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't get to die." With trembling, desperate hands, she put the needle to his flesh. She pushed it through. She stitched him up like he was a torn piece of fabric, a broken toy. Her work was ugly, a jagged, clumsy line. But the bleeding slowed, and then it stopped. She wrapped the wound with the entire roll of bandages, pulling it tight. She sat back on her heels, covered in his blood, her body shaking from the adrenaline. He was alive. His breathing was shallow, ragged, but he was alive. She sat in the hay, in the cold, and she held his hand. She held it for hours. He woke just before dawn. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, confused. Then the pain hit. "Ugh, Christ, you're okay," she whispered, her voice raw. You're stitched." He looked down at his shoulder, at the crude, bloody bandage. He looked at her face, stained with dirt and his own blood. You did this?" he rasped. She nodded, but he stared at the broken roof, at the first, pale, sickly gray light of dawn. "Matteo," he whispered. "Who is he? Luca, who is he? Really?" He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the distant, cold wind, and, she imagined, the sound of men searching the grounds. "He was my protégé," Luca said, his voice hollow, full of a pain that had nothing to do with his shoulder. "I found him on the docks, a kid, skinny, smart, hungrier than a wolf. He had nothing. He reminded me of me, before. I took him in." He turned his head, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. "I didn't just teach him. I loved him. Like a son. Before Nico had Leo, there was Matteo. I raised him." His voice broke. "Just for a second. He was my right hand. He knew everything, every account, every secret, every tunnel." What happened?" she whispered. "He betrayed me," Luca said, the words simple, brutal. "He got greedy, started skimming. I confronted him. He got on his knees in my study. He cried, he begged, he said he was weak, that he'd never do it again. He was my boy. So I let him live. I banished him. I told him if I ever saw his face again, I'd kill him. He closed his eyes. It was me. I did this. I let him live. And he planned the ambush. He was the one who told them where Nico would be. He killed my brother. He killed my nephew. And he used my own mercy to do it. Sophia's blood ran cold. She finally understood. This wasn't a rivalry. This was a patricide. A son trying to kill his father. Diego, she whispered, the name tasting like poison. He's not just working for him. He was a test. Luca looked at her, his eyes sharp, even through the pain. Matteo found out I was here, she said, the horrible logic clicking into place. He found Diego, my ex. He knew Diego was hunting me. He sent him to see who was protecting me, to see if it was really you. He used me. He used my past to find you. He doesn't just want your power. Luca, she said, her voice breaking. He wants to humiliate you. He wants to take everything that was ever yours, including, she couldn't say it, including you. Luca finished for her. She broke, the last of her strength, the adrenaline. It all fled. She dropped her head into her hands. This is my fault, she sobbed. I brought them here. I'm the one. I'm the reason. Oh, God, Luca, I'm so sorry. Don't. His voice was weak, but it was steel. He grabbed her, his good hand covered in dried blood, gripped her face, his fingers threading into her hair, forcing her to look at him. Don't you dare, he rasped, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Don't you dare blame yourself. You didn't do this. I did. My past, my mistakes. He pulled her closer, his face inches from hers. For 6 months, I was a ghost, a dead man. I was waiting for a bullet to finish what they started. And then you. He let out a pained breath. You are the only thing keeping me breathing. You are not the reason I'm dying, Sophia. You are the only reason I am still alive. He held her there, his gaze locking her, branding her. They hid for hours. The sun came up, a full, mocking, beautiful sunrise. Luca's fever set in. The wound, despite her care, was angry. He began to shiver, his teeth chattering. He started to talk. He didn't talk about Matteo. He talked about his past, about all of it. He hallucinated. He saw men she had never heard of. He saw Nico, and he apologized, over and over. I should have been there. Nicky, I'm sorry. He talked about Leo, the boat. I was gonna get him a boat for his birthday. He talked about his sins, the men he'd killed, the lives he'd ruined, the weight. It's so heavy. Sophia, the weight. She didn't leave. She didn't sleep. She sat in the cold, dirty hay, and she held him. She held his head in her lap, wiping his brow with a damp rag. She listened to the confessions of a monster, and all she saw was the man. She held him while he shook. She held him while he wept for his brother. She held him, and she was not afraid. The morning was bright and cold when the voice came. It was not a human voice. It was amplified, metallic, a loudspeaker, from a car outside the stables. Luca! The voice was young, arrogant, and full of a cold, laughing confidence. Matteo, I know you're in there, old man, or in the house, or in a hole. It doesn't matter. I have the house. I have your men, what's left of them, anyway. Luca's eyes snapped open. The fever was still there, but the beast was awake. He was alert. Come out, Luca, the voice boomed. You're wounded. You're alone. Your new whore. She's pretty. By the way, Diego is very eager to see her again, but I think I'll keep her for myself. A prize. Luca tried to stand. He was too weak. My gun, he rasped. Sophia handed it to him. Come out, Luca, let's finish this. Like men. Or do I have to burn the stables down with you in it? Luca looked at Sophia. His face was a mask of grief, not for himself, but for her. He had brought her into his hell. He used the wall to pull himself to his feet. He swayed, his bad shoulder a blaze of agony. But he stood. He was the boss. He was the monster. He was Luca Romano. He turned to her. He put his good hand on her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice fierce, her eyes dry. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of goodbye. It was everything he had left. It tasted of blood and fever and a love that was too new and too late. He pulled back. "If I don't come back, you run. The back wall. It's rotten. You can break through. You run. Sophia, you don't look back. You hear me? You don't ever look back." She didn't answer. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, her dark eyes full of a strength that matched his. She reached into the pocket of her blood-stained nightgown, and she pulled out the small paring knife, the one he'd heated, the one she'd packed. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't say goodbye. She pushed the knife into the pocket of his coat. "Come back," she said. It was not a plea. It was a command. Luca Romano looked at her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. He turned, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked out of the stable, into the bright, killing morning light. Luca stepped out of the darkness of the stables, into a morning that was painfully bright. The sunlight was a physical assault, a sharp, clean blade against his feverish, filthy skin. He was a ruin. His left shoulder was a universe of fire, the crude stitches Sophia had sewn pulling with every breath. He was caked in mud, sweat, and his own dried blood. His gun was heavy in his good hand, but he knew he was too weak, too slow to win a gunfight. He was not a man. He was a ghost, and he had come for one last haunt. The front courtyard, the place where Nico had bled out, was now an armed camp. 10, maybe 15 men, all in dark gear, all armed with weapons that made his revolver look like a child's toy. And in the center, standing beside a black armored SUV with a loudspeaker on its roof, was Matteo. He was not the skinny, hungry boy from the docks. This Matteo was dressed in a pristine, black three-piece suit. His hair was slicked back. He was clean-shaven, his face handsome, his eyes cold and empty. He looked like a magazine cover. He looked like the son Luca had never had, and the devil he had always known. Matteo was sipping from a small, porcelain cup, an espresso, on a battlefield. The arrogance of it made Luca's blood boil. "Ah," Matteo said, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. He didn't use the loudspeaker. He wanted this to be intimate. "The lion, come out of his den." He set the cup down on the hood of the SUV. "Look at you, old man. You're a mess. I almost feel bad." Luca just stood there, swaying slightly, his gun held at his side. He was saving his energy. He was saving his rage. "You're alone," Matteo stated, looking around. "My men. They said they saw the girl. Where is she? Did you feed her to the wolves? Or is she hiding, waiting for me?" Luca's face was stone. "Diego really wants her," Matteo mused, walking a small, casual circle. "He's been very graphic about what he's going to do when he finds her. But I told him, I'm the boss. I get first choice." He smiled, a bright, empty, reptilian smile. "I'm going to take her. Luca, I'm going to take her, and I'm going to take this house, and I'm going to take your name, and she will scream my name in your bed, and you will just be a bloody memory on the pavement, just like Nico. That was it. The name, the taunt, the image of Sophia, the grief, the pain, the fever. It all focused, condensing from a suffocating fog into a single, white-hot point of pure, annihilating rage. Luca was not a man. He was not a ghost. He was the beast. He didn't shout. He didn't fire his gun. He dropped the useless weapon and he charged. The movement was so sudden, so suicidally insane, that it caught everyone, including Matteo, off guard. The guards raised their weapons, but Matteo shouted, "No, he's mine!" Luca, running on a broken shoulder and pure, unadulterated will, crossed the 20 yards of gravel and slammed into Matteo like a freight train. The fight was not a fight. It was a mauling. It was not skill. It was brutality. Luca's only thought was to tear, to break, to end. His good hand grabbed Matteo's throat, and he squeezed. lifting the younger man off his feet, slamming him against the side of the SUV. Matteo's hands clawed at Luca's arm, his eyes wide with shock, his face turning purple. "You don't say her name," Luca roared, his voice a gravelly, broken sound. He smashed Matteo's head against the car, once, twice, but the fever was burning him alive. His bad shoulder was screaming. Black spots danced in his vision. Matteo, a snake to the last, rammed his knee up into Luca's groin. Luca gasped, the pain lancing through him, his grip loosening just for a second. It was all Matteo needed. He twisted, breaking free, and landed a hard, fast punch to Luca's wounded shoulder. Luca screamed, a sound of pure agony, and this time, he was the one who fell. He hit the gravel on his knees, his vision tunneling. Matteo was on him in an instant. He was younger, he was faster, and he was uninjured. He tackled Luca, sending him sprawling onto his back. Matteo was on top, his knees pinning Luca's arms, his face a mask of his own triumphant rage. "Old man!" He spat, his fist connecting with Luca's jaw. "Old, weak, dead!" He hit him again. Luca tasted the copper of his own blood. From his boot, Matteo pulled a long, thin stiletto. The blade snapped open, a silver fang in the morning light. "You should have killed me, Luca," he hissed, pressing the point of the knife against Luca's throat. "You should have killed me when you had the chance. Mercy is a weakness." He pressed harder. A small bead of blood welled up on Luca's skin, from inside the dark stable. Sophia watched. She'd seen him charge. She'd seen him fall. She'd seen the knife. Her hand was on the rotten back wall. "Run," his voice echoed. "Don't look back." She looked at the gun in her hand, the one he had taught her to load. She was trembling. She was not a killer. She was not a warrior. She was a maid. Come back. She had told him. It was a command. She stepped out of the shadows of the stable, her bare feet silent on the grass. She was a pale, bloody ghost in her white nightgown. No one saw her. They were all watching the execution. She was 30 feet away. She raised the gun, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She held it with both hands, just as he had shown her. She tried to aim, but she was just pointing at the tableau, at the man she loved, and the monster who was killing him. She closed her eyes, and she pulled the trigger. The sound was a small, sharp pop. It was nothing compared to the rifles, but it was everything. Matteo screamed. It was not a roar of rage. It was a high, thin shriek of pure, surprised pain. He looked down. A small, dark hole was blossoming on the side of his right leg, just above the knee. He had been shot. He turned, his eyes wide with disbelief, and he saw her, Sophia, standing like a terrified angel of death, the gun smoking in her hands. "You—" he gasped. It was only a second, a single, shocked, confused second. It was the moment Luca needed. With a final, explosive roar, Luca's good hand shot up, grabbing Matteo's wrist, the one holding the knife. He didn't just stop it. He twisted. There was a wet, heavy snap, the sound of bone breaking. Matteo shrieked again, the knife clattering to the gravel. In one fluid, brutal movement, Luca reversed their positions. He was on top, his knee on Matteo's chest, his good hand grabbing the fallen knife. He pressed the point of the stiletto under Matteo's chin, pushing his head back into the dirt. The entire courtyard was frozen. The guards, their guns still raised, did not move. Their leader was beaten. Luca was breathing like a dying bull. His chest was heaving. His face was a mask of blood, sweat, and a terrible, final clarity. He could do it. He could end it. He could push the blade 2 inches and finish the boy he had raised, the monster he had created. He looked at Matteo's eyes. They were wide. They were terrified. They were the same eyes of the boy who had begged him for mercy in his study all those years ago. He looked over at the stable. He saw Sophia. She was still standing there, her whole body shaking, but she had not run. He looked back down at Matteo. He let out a long, slow breath. The fever, the rage, it all bled out of him, leaving just a cold, weary emptiness. He didn't kill him. He leaned in, his lips brushing Matteo's ear so only he could hear. His voice was not a roar. It was a whisper. "You will not die. Matteo," he rasped. "You will live. You will live with one leg. You will live with nothing." He pushed the knife just a fraction, drawing another drop of blood. "And you will live. Every single day. For the rest of your miserable life. Knowing that you lost. Knowing that you, with your army, and your suits, and your guns, you lost it all. To a broken old man, and a maid." He pulled back, took the knife from his throat, and threw it into the dirt. He was done. And then, in the distance, a new sound, a sound that was clean and sharp and final. Sirens, not one, a dozen. The men in tactical gear looked at each other, confused, panicked. This wasn't part of the plan. What did you do?" Matteo gasped from the ground, his face white with pain and a new, dawning horror. Luca didn't answer. He looked at Sofia. She, while holding him in the stable, while listening to him confess, had not been idle. One of the men in the tunnel? The one who had spoken of Matteo. He'd had a satellite phone on his belt. She had taken it, and while Luca slept, she had gone through it. She didn't just find calls. She found ledgers. She found coordinates. She found shipment manifests. She found everything. She found the proof of Matteo's new empire. And she had made a call, an anonymous call, to a federal task force. She had told them where to find the biggest racketeer in Chicago, and she had given them the proof. The police cars, the state troopers, the black federal SUVs, they flooded the courtyard. It was over. Luca was arrested. Of course he was. He was Luca Romano. He was sitting on the ground, covered in blood, next to a man he had just brutalized, in a courtyard full of guns. They put him in cuffs, his good arm pulled behind his back, the pain making him almost pass out. But he didn't fight. He didn't say a word. As they walked him to a car, he looked at Sofia. She was being wrapped in a blanket by a female officer, her face pale, her eyes only on him. He nodded. Just once. A small, almost imperceptible movement. "You did good. The charges against Matteo Salvi were extensive. RICO, murder, racketeering, drug trafficking. The anonymous evidence was ironclad. He was never going to see the outside of a prison again. The charges against Luca Romano were complicated. He was a known entity, but the evidence showed he was a retired one. He was on his own property. He was attacked by a known and now very wanted criminal. The dead men in his house and on his grounds were all on Matteo's payroll. And the star witness, a quiet, terrified young woman named Sofia Marquez, testified that Luca had been protecting her from men who were there to kill them both. The charges were dropped. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of lawyers and doctors, and a silence that was almost as loud as the gunfire. The house was clean, the blood was scrubbed, the bullet holes were patched. Mrs. Petrov, in an uncharacteristic show of something, had seen to it. Sofia waited. She lived in the house. She was not a maid. She was not a prisoner. She was just waiting. He returned on a Tuesday. The day was cold, the sky a high, hard blue. Sofia was in the garden, the one she had been weeding when Vince Bianchi had arrived. It was just a patch of cold, dead dirt. She was on her knees, a small trowel in her hand, trying to turn the soil, trying to make something grow. She heard the gravel crunch, but she didn't flinch. She stood. He was there, at the edge of the garden, just watching her. He was not the man she had met. He was not the beast who had stalked the halls. He was not the bleeding soldier she had stitched back together. He was clean-shaven, his jaw sharp and pale. His black hair was cut short. He was wearing a simple, dark sweater and jeans. He was thinner. A long, angry, purple scar peeked out from the collar of his sweater. His left arm was in a sling, but he was alive. They didn't speak. There were no words for this, for the cellar, for the blood, for the terror, for the kiss. He walked toward her, his steps slow, measured. He looked at her, his eyes, the ones that had been hollow with grief and hot with fever, were now just clear, and they were full of her. He stopped, just in front of her. She could smell the soap from his skin. He didn't touch her face. He didn't kiss her. He dropped to one knee. It was not a proposal. It was not a surrender. It was the act of a man who had been carrying the weight of 1,000 sins for a lifetime and had finally been allowed to set it down. He bowed his head, this proud, broken, beautiful man, and he rested his forehead so gently against her belly, against her, the center of her, the place of life and warmth and hope. He let out a breath he had been holding for 30 years. Sophia's hand, no longer trembling, came up. She did not stroke his hair. She did not coddle him. She held him. Her hand rested on the back of his head, her fingers gripping him, anchoring him. She held him like a man who had finally, after a long, terrible war, come home. They stood there for a long time, in the cold, winter garden. He murmured, his voice a low, rough vibration against her skin, the first words he had said to her since the day he had been taken. "You changed everything." She looked up, at the high, hard, blue sky. A single, small tear of relief, of an end, of a beginning, rolled down her cheek. She whispered, her voice as certain as the sunrise. In seconds, "Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Luca and Sophia. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you love stories like this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an update. Your thoughts are so important to us. So please share them in English in the comments below. We read every single one.